Hey folks, Darren with Fervent Astronomy. This time with a little review of a little lens, the Sigma 20mm f2 DG DN Contemporary I series lens. Does it say I series? It doesn't, but this is, for those who know, one of Sigma's I series lenses, which is to say it's a slower but more compact lens, and it's what I would dub an experience lens. It's made pretty much all out of metal, metal bodied, and it's very vintage-esque. So we've got a clicky aperture ring here, which has a really good click to it. Some of you are going to hate that. For those of you, there's a little A setting so you can control aperture through the body. We've got a manual focus to autofocus switch, and you'll see not much else besides the manual focus ring here, which I'd say is good. It's good. I like the 17mm. Yeah, I like the 17mm manual focus ring a little bit better. It's a little bit more damp, but this is perfectly fine. Metal. Of course, we have a metal hood. It's a pedal hood. And underneath here, we actually get two caps. This is the plastic pinch cap. It comes with a magnetic cap, which is pretty cool as well. But when you've got it on the lens, there's no easy way to get it off if you've got the hood on, and I always have the hood on. So anyway, but you do get the option, which is neat. And I feel like that's something I've heard said in pretty much every review of these types of lenses. But you can see 20mm, actually quite a small front element here. It's not too bad. And this is a 62mm filter thread. Yeah, for the types of stuff that you might use this lens for, that makes using like a polarizing filter or ND or whatever pretty easy. People, I've been told, take pictures not just at night. Certainly that's why I got this lens, because I have been adapting it to this Nikon ZF with the Megadap ETZ21, which is a really thin adapter ring, autofocus ring, and it takes my vintagey lens and it works with my vintagey camera, and I just have all kinds of fun. Hyper hipster. I put this thing in black and white mode and I go around full manual with all the manual switches and dials, and it's great. Don't spoil my joy, okay? This lens, how does it do for astrophotography? Can you do double duty? F2? Not that bad. You can get away with F2. It's just a little bit less than f1.8, and it's nowhere near as restrictive as f4 or even f2.8. So you can use f2.8. F2 should work, but let's not speculate. Let's find out. Howdy folks, welcome to Lightroom, where we have a lens that is producing these lovely, mostly black images. Today we're looking at the Sigma 20mm f2 DG DN Contemporary quote-unquote I series lens, in this case for Sony E mount, but also L mount and maybe other mounts in the future. We have 8 samples today. 4 are taken with the A7R Mark V from Sony. These are 60-second tracked exposures tracked with the Fornax Mounts LighTrack II. Pretty bomb-proof star tracker. Fervent Astronomy happens to be Fornax's North American distributor, so if you're interested in learning more about that, please check out ferventastronomy.com. The other 4 samples here are 15-second exposures taken with the Sony Alpha 1 50-megapixel camera, and these are just on a tripod. No tracking, to give you an idea of what you can expect as far as star trails and that type of thing. All the Alpha 1 shots are at ISO 500. All of the A7R Mark V shots are ISO 320. Why those 2 ISOs? Well, both of these cameras are what's called ISO invariant, which is to say that they only have 2 real ISO values each, and these are amplification stages, analog amplification stages to be exact. All the other ISOs in these cameras are just digitally amplified from the base ISO that's nearest. So everything from 100 to 250 or whatever it would be is from the 100 ISO base, and everything from 320 onwards for the A7R Mark V or 500 onwards from the A1 are just digitally, like literally the camera is taking this image that we have here at 320 and it's just hitting the exposure button a couple of times. That's all it's doing. And then it's locking you in there. So why am I doing this? Well, I shoot at the base ISO because it provides the best editing latitude in the long run. I can boost this and make it look exactly like a shot that's taken at ISO 6400, what have you. Same noise, same ability to boost the shadows, everything the same. The only difference is if I take that shot at ISO 320, and the caveat is at the same f-stop, at the same exposure, everything else being the same, if I just shoot it at the base ISO, I might retain some highlight information. So if I'm shooting a galaxy, star-forming region in a nebula, or maybe some bright stars, if I shoot here, I might retain some highlight information that would get clipped on the right side of the histogram in a shot at a higher ISO value. And if it gets clipped and locked in, then you can't recover it. While these shots look black and they don't look pretty necessarily on the back of the camera, I'm not giving anything up by doing this. So if you want to learn more about that, more about ISO and variance, it's not something that every camera has, but various cameras do. You can head over to the link in the description. I'll bring you back to Fervent Astronomy's website, and we've got all kinds of resources there, links to articles by very smart people. So check that out if you want. And while you're there, you can actually find these samples full raw for your perusal. By all means, download them, pixel peep, do all that good stuff. But please respect my copyright, respect the fact that I put a lot of effort into getting them, had to buy the lens, etc., etc. So please don't distribute them online or anywhere else for that matter. Please don't misrepresent them as your own. Please don't use them as the basis for your own review. This is my copyrighted work. Please use it in the manner in which I'm providing it in good faith. So all that out of the way, let's kind of fix things up here because it's really hard to assess aberrations and optical performance of black images. So yeah, here we go. Wow, isn't that magical? Let's take a look at this image with the Alpha 1 15-second on a tripod, f2, and yeah, pretty dark, still pretty dark. If we look here in the navigator, it's a little easier to see, but there is a bit of vignetting, and that's just something that most, if not all lenses have. Let's zoom into the center here, and we can see 50 megapixels, untracked, 15 seconds, even at 20 millimeter focal length here, we're starting to get some star trails. You can also see that there's some chromatic aberration, which we'll talk about in a minute. If we go to the corners, star trails. So, you know, this lens might be passable, especially if you have a lower megapixel camera, you might be able to stretch this out longer. From this viewing distance, you know, we can't really notice the star trail, so it's not necessarily a huge deal. You could stretch things out longer, but I'd be more comfortable doing that with, you know, an A7 III or a A7S III or something to that effect, where you're dealing with lower megapixel counts and it's going to hide the star trails a little bit better. But even here, we can see them when we're zoomed in at 400. If we doubled the exposure time, these star trails would be double the length and they would start to become noticeable even zoomed out like this, but your mileage may vary. Now let's look at the tracked sample. So first of all, we can see that vignetting, and as is often the case, you know, there's a bias to one side. Here it's a little darker on the left. Sometimes with a lens it'll be a little darker on the right or whatnot, so things are maybe not centered in the center, so to speak. That's not the worst thing in the world. These are things that are made by humans. They're not perfect, and this is perfectly cromulent. There's maybe, just flip back and forth to f2.2, losing that bright spot in the middle, but retaining the same exposure around the edges. It's maybe like a little extra contrast to be gained by stopping down, but I don't know that I would do that for that purpose. We'll see later when we look at the corrections. Let's zoom into the center here, and right off the bat, we can see that we have round stars. Our tracking did its job. We do have that chromatic aberration. What's happening here is the lens isn't able to rain all this blue color in and get it on point. So it's kind of blowing out a little bit here, bloating the star a little bit. I don't see a ton of what you would consider lower contrast around some of these brighter stars. So I don't think spherical distortions are much to worry about. Maybe like a little bit here. I don't know if you can see the star, if in a perfect world would be a nice tight bright spot here, but there is a little bit of loss of contrast around the edges. While this is undoubtedly a corrected lens for spherical distortion, there's always going to be a little bit, but nothing to write home about. Yeah, let's take a look at the corners. This one first. All right, we got some little space swallows here, that little fork tail. We'll talk about this in a moment. Let's check out this side. Pretty similar shape in the two top corners. Bottom corner, maybe a little slight difference, but still pretty consistent. You gain like a third little tail here in the bottom left-hand corner, but overall looks pretty consistent. Well, that's actually getting closer to the middle of the frame there. So as we're here at the edges, things look pretty much the same. So what's happening here? This is not coma. This is something called astigmatism. Some of you might have astigmatism in your eyeballs. In this case, this lens has astigmatism. In the center here, you can see we've got round stars. It's able to focus that light into a relative point, but when we get to the edges here, it's not able to focus that light into a point along two axes. So there's tangential astigmatism, which is along radii that come from the center to the edges of the frame, or vice versa if you want to think of it like that. And then at a right angle to each of those would be sagittal astigmatism, which gives the effect that sort of a ring around the frame, never pointing really towards the center or the edges of the frame. For our little space swallows here, the lengthening here in the middle, like the body, would be tangential astigmatism from the corner to the center or vice versa. And then you're basically crossing that T with the sagittal astigmatism. And even though you've got these like swept back kind of position, that's not to say that it's pointing towards the middle or the edges. It's basically manifesting at a right angle. So tangential, sagittal astigmatism, not coma. What is coma? Well, I can't really show you because this lens doesn't have any that I can really see, but coma, or chromatic aberration as it's actually called, occurs when the stars will fuzz out to one side, make a little wedge shape. That's evocative of the tail of a comet. Comet tail, coma, chromatic aberration. That's the root of the word. If it's external coma, the little comet tails will point away from the center. If it's internal, they'll point towards the center. Here, we don't have any, at least nothing that is discernible. Astigmatism, no coma. Not bad. Here, dealing with aberrations, there's no such thing as a perfect lens. First of all, everything has some type of aberration. So I like to deal with things like this, the way people experience photos, not like this, the way people on forums experience photos. I like to look at things in the whole frame. And when it comes to these aberrations, like these, a little bit more noticeable, how is it affecting the viewing experience? With astigmatism, it would make stars tend to look bigger, such as this. You can just kind of see on my screen that this looks a little bit weird. This star here looks nice and round. This one, I'm getting hints that it might not be. Then some of the stars here might look a little bit bigger than they might otherwise if they were in the center of the frame. And that can give this weird distortion look. And it could be artistically relevant. You can work with it depending on the lens. And sometimes, you know, if you're using a lens for time lapses or something, which is something personally that I do a lot, it can be quite distracting if the frame is kind of moving. If you're stacking images and there's some really severe stuff and your images are not all 100% perfect, like let's say you have an object here in the middle that you're trying to stack. In some frames it's here, in some frames it's here, and it starts to get towards astigmatism territory, that can really mess up the stacking and cost you some frames. So these are things that become relevant. In this case, for a wide field 20mm lens, you're not going to be stacking necessarily. You might be doing time lapses, and to my eye, we'll notice more once we clean up this vignetting, but I don't think it's really an issue, personally. It's not making them look relatively huge, or all the stars aren't looking really big and stretched out. Let's just take a little look-see here. See how we're getting almost like a sun star effect, like with the tines, diffraction spikes out of the back of some of these stars here, which isn't really visible zoomed out, so I don't think it's a huge deal. Let's look at some of the other parts of the frame. Yeah, maybe a little bit there, definitely here. So that's kind of interesting. It's wide open. I don't know what could potentially be causing that extra effect, but I don't think it's too relevant. Here is something that's a little bit interesting though. This is, I believe, a little bit of field curvature. Let's pop to the center of the frame. So see how the stars are sized relatively tight, smaller for the most part than the mouse cursor. Let's jump out here. Now they are suffering astigmatism and they are getting stretched a little bit. These stars are showing a little bit of field curvature maybe. They look a little defocused to me. Let's pop over here. Yeah, there seems to be a little bit worse over here. Maybe over here, not too bad. Well, maybe a little bit. And then we're in the corners, we're so dark, it's kind of hard to tell, but actually it doesn't look necessarily the same as this. So it does appear that there might be a manifestation of field curvature with this lens. Field curvature is to say that when you're in focus in one part of the field, you're not in focus at other parts of the field. So they are literally out of focus. That's because lenses are not perfect and you're trying to use curved things to project light on a flat thing. And there's always going to be slight deviations there. Where things are focused in the center, you might find in another part of the frame, they're a little bit defocused. And while there is certainly astigmatism coming into play here, the stars do give me a bit of a defocus vibe here. So just want to throw that out there. That being said, it's not terrible. And I don't know if it extends into the corners. It almost seems like the center's in focus. Then we've got a little bit of a defocusing donut, and then maybe the corners are in focus again a little bit better. Yes, that can happen. That's totally within the realm of possibility. But even if it is happening, it's not really affecting the size of things enough that I think it's an issue. Again, I experience photos like this, not like this. So yeah, put a pin in that one. Maybe a little bit of field curvature, not a huge deal. Let's stop the lens down though. This is f2. f2.2. You see we lose that bright spot in the middle. f2.5, we're getting more consistent exposure across the frame. That being said, getting pretty dark here, and I don't know that we're getting much of a benefit. We'll find out. And then f2.8, pretty dark. This is a 60-second tracked exposure. It's not like the most practical way to use this lens, and I don't know that there's any benefit to doing so. Let's pop into the middle here. f2, 2.2, 2.5, still not really rectifying all of the chromatic aberration, although we can probably do that in one click in the develop module. 2.8, still there a little bit. Yeah, based on that, I don't think I would really stop the lens down. Let's take a look at the astigmatism here. f2, 2.2, 2.5, 2.8. So by 2.8, the sagittal astigmatism is mostly taken care of. The tangential, not so much. And I just don't really see that much of a benefit to doing that. Like, this isn't that disruptive. So yeah, I'd say this is probably a wide open type of lens if you're going to use it for astro at all. Let's pop into develop module. Remove chromatic aberrations, does nothing. Let's grab our little eyedropper here. Click. There we go, that fixed it. So here we've resolved that fringe, that purple fringe, and you can see there's like a halo of low contrastness around the star, and that's fine. I mean, you want to see Ursa Major, right? It's going to be more prominent anyway, so it's not a big deal. Let's go to our profile corrections. It says a built-in lens profile is applied. So this is chromatic aberration profile. Take a look at that. Didn't do anything, didn't work. So let's enable profile corrections. Whoa, okay. That's no good. We're just going to reset things here. That's really odd. All right, so I'm enabling the profile corrections, and we're just going to bump the exposure up again. Yeah, for whatever reason, the profile correction is heavy-handed here, and it's overcorrecting the vignetting. We're just going to tone that down a little bit. There, that's better. I've never seen that before. Usually it doesn't do a good enough job. Here, the built-in chromatic aberration profile isn't doing much, and the profile correction is overdoing it. At any rate, adjusting the slider has sort of fixed things. So we're going to flip this on and off a couple of times, and we can see that there is a geometric correction here. This lens has barrel distortion, which is to say the center of the frame has the appearance of bulging out at the viewer, and the edges and corners have the appearance of being pushed away. So when you enable the profile correction, it's flattening things. It's pushing the center away from the viewer and pulling the corners into plane a little bit closer. We're not losing any top and bottom field of view. You can watch these stars are pretty much staying where they should be. The corners are getting stretched out a little bit, as are the edges. You can see this star makes it pretty close to the edge. So we are losing some field of view diagonally and across the long edge of the frame, but across the short edge, not so much, at least in the middle. So that's good to see. We scale down here, we can see the transformation, and this transformation is pretty aggressive. So there you go, pretty aggressive. Not the worst thing in the world though. Might be losing a little bit of our focal length, but I don't think it's a huge issue. 20 mil is still pretty wide. And ideally, you've put your important stuff in the middle of the frame. That being said, keep that in mind if you plan to use those corrections, especially if you're going to use this lens for something that includes a foreground, that might have straight lines. You might want to apply the corrections. You might want to give yourself like a little extra room with your composition. But yeah, that's that. Let's wrap this up. All right. Well, what did you folks think of that? Is this a viable alternative for something like the Sony 20mm f1.8? Having owned that lens as well, and I believe you can find a review on the channel. This is a little bit smaller, maybe not altogether small enough to make a huge deal for you, but overall, this lens has a different purpose. This lens, part of its purpose is aesthetic. And I know I love using it for the chosen reason that I bought it, as I explained, to walk around with a fake vintage digital camera with a fake vintage digital camera lens. You know what? Sometimes just the joy of shooting is joy enough. So how about you? Is this the lens for you? Are you willing to accept any compromises so that it can do double duty for you? Do you not care about astrophotography at all and are just going to put it on a Nikon ZF? If you are, more power to you. But as always, I hope you found this review useful. I hope you found the information to be worth the watch, and thank you for watching. Hopefully we'll see you in the next one.